in these institutions, guarantee the right to freedom of assembly of all citizens by ensuring that the restrictions provided by law are not applied in an extensive manner, ensure that the human rights defenders and journalists can exercise their tasks without fear of reprisals, including for bringing those responsible for attacks and harassment of journalists to justice, guarantee an independent and impartial judiciary, and ensure respect for the separation of powers. Ensure the individual's right to freedom of expression, in particular for the revision of the legislation on counter-terrorism by narrowing the scope of the definition of terrorism.
Thank you very much. Azerbaijan has the floor.
Welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey headed by His Excellency Mr. Faruk Kaymakçı, and thanks for the presentation of the national report. We welcome the major achievement of Turkey in ensuring human rights and the rule of law in the country. Furthermore, the generosity that Turkey shows by hosting the world's largest refugee population is commendable. Azerbaijan offers the following recommendations to brotherly Turkey. Continue applying human-centered approach to people seeking refuge in the country and share its best practice in this regard with the international community. 2. Take further measures to ensure a zero-tolerance policy towards domestic violence. 3. Continue its efforts to improve the access to justice for vulnerable groups, including children, migrants, elderly, and persons with disabilities. We wish Turkey a very successful review. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Azerbaijan. Now the Bahamas have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. The Bahamas extends a warm welcome to the delegation of Turkey. We commend Turkey's commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights, including its efforts to advance the rights of persons with disabilities, women's rights, and freedom of religion and expression. In a constructive spirit, the Bahamas recommends that Turkey, 1, addresses root causes of pervasive underreporting of gender-based violence and undertakes concrete steps to encourage reporting, including through the provision of adequate resources for this purpose. 2, increases efforts to combat trafficking in person, particularly among vulnerable groups such as migrants. And 3, ratifies the Paris Climate Agreement and ensures the mainstreaming of gender equality in its implementation. We commend the provisions implemented to prevent all forms of discrimination against women seen in the country's 10th and 11th Development Plan, in the Strategy Paper and Action Plan on Women's Empowerment, and in the 3rd National Action Plan.
Thank you very much. Sorry, time's up. Bahrain has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. The Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes the delegation of Turkey and thanks them for their presentation. We welcome Turkey's commitment and openness to the UPR process and appreciate the attention given to the refugee crisis and the empowerment of women. In this regard, we recommend Turkey to 1. Reconsider the minimum employment age for children and address the situation of migrant children involved in informal labor. 2. Undertake necessary measures to combat trafficking in person, especially women and children amongst refugees. The Kingdom of Bahrain wishes Turkey a successful review. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Bahrain. I now give the floor to His Excellency the Ambassador of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam President. Bangladesh warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey. We commend Turkey's efforts to uphold human rights standards and its cooperation with the international human rights mechanism. Turkey's submission of national report under CRPD, CMW, CEDAW and CRC since the last UPR cycle is laudable. We appreciate also the establishment of the Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey and the work on Human Rights Action Plan. Bangladesh recommends that Turkey first continues to strengthen the Human Rights and Equality Institution to uphold human rights of all people and prevent discrimination, and second, continues to promote education for all people, including women and persons with disabilities, as well as lifelong learning to uphold justice, human rights and inclusiveness. We also deeply condole the deaths of the recent earthquake in Turkey. We wish Turkey a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Belarus. Ambassador.
We welcome the delegation of Turkey led by the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Faruk Kaymakçı. We note with satisfaction the country's broad range of human rights obligations and its accession to a number of regional and international treaties. We also note the further developments to the national human rights framework, including legislative reform, judicial reform, the development of an action plan in the field of human rights. We would like to recommend further strengthening national capacities in the promotion and protection of human rights, taking into account the concluding observations of the treaty bodies and the recommendations of the Universal Periodic Review. We wish Turkey a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Next speaker is Belgium.
Madam President, Belgium welcomes that Turkey, in line with our recommendations during the second UPR, has adopted legislation to curb the practice of early and forced marriages. My country is, however, concerned about the deterioration of human rights and freedoms in Turkey since the previous UPR. My country therefore recommends, first, to review the anti-terror law and the penal code to bring it in line with the Turkish constitution and Article 19 of the ICCPR. Second, to ensure the independence of the judiciary by amending legislation so that the appointment of the judiciary better respects the principles of independence and impartiality. And third, to strengthen law enforcement in the fight against early and forced marriages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The next country is Bhutan.
Thank you, Madam President. Bhutan would like to thank the delegation of Turkey for their comprehensive report. We welcome the judicial reform strategy of Turkey for strengthening the rule of law and protecting and promoting the rights and freedoms more effectively. The establishment of the Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey is noteworthy. We recommend Turkey to continue the efforts of ensuring equal rights and opportunities of women and implement effectively the action plans on empowering women and combating violence against women. We commend Turkey for ratifying the optional protocol to CRPD and recommend Turkey to continue efforts towards adopting legislative and institutional measures to enhance the rights of persons with disabilities. We wish Turkey a successful review. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. I now pass the floor to Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you, Madam President. First, we express our deep condolences for the tragic earthquake. Bosnia and Herzegovina warmly welcome the distinguished delegation of Turkey and thank for their presentation today. We express appreciation to the authorities of Turkey for the level of commitment to promote and protect human rights. We welcome coordinated preparation of the report with all national stakeholders and civil society. Bosnia and Herzegovina welcome legal reforms that have been carried out since the second cycle of the UPR and would like to recommend to Turkey to continue to review its legislation in line with its commitment to the international human rights obligations and to continue to strengthen the rule of law, protecting rights of freedom and assuring the right to equal treatment of persons, preventing discrimination. We wish Turkey a successful result of the third review. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Botswana, please.
Madam President, Botswana warmly welcomes the delegation of Turkey to the third cycle of the UPR process and thank them for a comprehensive national report. We convey our heartfelt condolences and sympathies to Turkey, particularly families of victims of the earthquake that occurred a few days ago. Botswana welcomes all normative and legislative measures undertaken by Turkey in the promotion and protection of human rights, particularly on ensuring the effectiveness of the judiciary. We make the following two recommendations. One, evaluate the anti-terrorism law with a view to bring it in line with international standards. And two, finalize and effectively implement the Provisional Action Plan on combating alien enforced marriage and the 2018-2023 Strategy Document and National Action Plan on combating alien enforced marriages. We wish Turkey a successful review. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Botswana. I now give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Madam President. Brazil welcomes Turkey, expresses condolences for the victims of the recent earthquake and recommends 1. To redouble efforts to combat violence against women, including by ensuring that so-called honor crimes are effectively punished. 2. To strengthen freedom of expression and privacy online and offline, including by refraining from blocking online content without judicial oversight and from resorting to internet and mobile shutdowns. We congratulate Turkey for its anti-discrimination efforts and for improving access to education for girls and for children with disabilities. While recognizing the challenges of terrorism in Turkey, Brazil encouraged enhanced measures to address them by strengthening due process, freedom of expression, and the protection of all national, ethnic, and linguistic minorities. We encourage Turkey to ratify this Convention on Enforced Disappearance. Wish Turkey a successful review.
Thank you, Brazil. Next speaker is Bulgaria.
Thank you, Madam President. Bulgaria welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey. Bulgaria notes with appreciation that non-Muslim Turkish citizens, including Bulgarian Christians who are Turkish citizens, practice their religion without any impediment. In this context, we praise the complete renovation of the so-called Bulgarian Iron Church in Istanbul. We encourage Turkey to ensure that the legitimate enforcement of anti-terrorist legislation does not infringe on the fundamental rights and freedoms, including freedom of opinion and expression. Bulgaria recommends 1. Undertake the adequate steps concerning the property claims of persons from Bulgarian identity from Eastern Thrace, following our recommendations from the first UPR cycle. 2. Continue its efforts to ensure that the national law protects freedom of expression online and offline. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Bulgaria. La parole est au
Burkina Faso, please. Thank you, Madam President. Burkina Faso welcomes the delegation of Turkey. We thank them for the presentation of their national report. Burkina Faso welcomes the legislative and political measures taken by Turkey to implement the recommendations addressed to it during the previous UPR in 2015. This despite a national context marked by the refugee crisis and terrorist threats. Burkina Faso recommends that Turkey should prevent and end harmful traditional practices against girls and women, especially early marriages, and this across its territory. We wish Turkey every success during this review. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you. Burundi has the floor. Thank you, Madam President. Burundi welcomes the high-level Turkish delegation, whom we thank for their report. We are pleased at the constitutional review undertaken by Turkey to better comply with its international human rights obligations. We commend the implementation of the 11th Development Plan, as well as that of the Strategic Paper and the Action Plan for Women's Empowerment. This is unequivocal evidence of the government's firm determination to combat all forms of discrimination against women. Burundi recommends that Turkey pursue its efforts to further improve the administration of justice. We wish Turkey every success. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Cambodia. Could the delegate change microphone, please?
Maybe your microphone has a problem. Maybe your neighbor has a better microphone.
Thank you, Madam President. Cambodia recognizes Turkey's ongoing effort to review legislation and to undertake legal reform in line with commitment to international human rights obligations. Cambodia acknowledges Turkey's continued engagement with UN human rights mechanism and special procedure. Cambodia commends several initiatives that Turkey has launched in order to promote right to education, particularly women and girls, as well as persons with disability. In the constructive spirit, Cambodia would like to put forward two recommendations. 1. Continue to enhance efforts to eliminate violence against women. 2. Consider taking additional steps to increase women's representation at the decision-making level. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience with the microphone. The next speaker is Canada.
Thank you, Madam President. Canada notes the first package of Turkey's judicial reform strategy as a step towards strengthening the rule of law and welcomes Turkey's leadership in hosting nearly 4 million refugees. Canada recommends that Turkey reform the judicial appointment process to ensure the separation of powers and guarantee judicial independence and impartiality. 2. Ensure that anti-terrorism and defamation legislation do not interfere with freedom of opinion and expression to enable the work of journalists, artists, academics, and human rights defenders. 3. Uphold the law on assemblies and demonstrations to limit arbitrary restrictions on freedom of assembly, including on peaceful gatherings by the LGBTI community, women's rights organizations, and opposition parties. And 4, take further steps to expand national and local resources to respond to all forms of gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada. Next speaker is Chad.
Thank you, Madam President. Chad welcomes the Turkish delegation, and we thank the delegation for its national report under the UPR's third cycle. Chad appreciates the clarity of the report, which highlights the multiple initiatives and measures taken by the government of Turkey to protect and promote human rights. However, in a constructive spirit, Chad recommends the following. 1. To ratify the optional protocol to the CRC by establishing a procedure for presenting and harmonizing its national legislation, bring it into line with the Convention on the Rights of the Child and its protocols. Secondly, to repeal discriminatory provisions against persons with disabilities and to bring its anti-discrimination legislation into line with the CRPD. We wish Turkey every success under this review. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you very much. Chile has the floor. Thank you, Madam President. We welcome the Turkish delegation for the presentation of its national report, and we express our condolences to the victims of the recent earthquake. We congratulate Turkey on the progress achieved since the second UPR cycle, and in order to build on that success, we make the following recommendations. 1, to ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances. Secondly, to step up efforts to investigate, prosecute, and punish any act of discrimination or violence based on sexual orientation or gender identity, and to adopt comprehensive legislation to prevent and punish such acts. Thirdly, to further strengthen the National Human Rights and Equality Institution to ensure its functional, structural and financial independence in line with the Paris Principles. We also note the ratification. Thank you very much, says the President. Your time is up. Sorry, China has the floor.
Madam President, the Chinese delegation welcomes Turkey to participate in the UPR. China recognizes the achievements by Turkey in promoting and protecting human rights and wishes to make 2 recommendations. 1, to take concrete measures to protect the rights of ethnic minorities. 2, to adopt measures to combat violence against women in order to protect women's rights. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, China. Next country is the Comoros.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Our delegation welcomes the delegation of Turkey, and we would like to congratulate and thank Turkey for its efforts and sacrifices made in welcoming the tens of thousands of refugees driven from their homes by violence and war. We have the following recommendations for Turkey. Firstly, to grant the independent National Human Rights Institution the necessary wherewithal to be in line with the Paris Principles. Secondly, to step up the fight against all forms of violence against women. And thirdly, to ensure through the most appropriate means access to higher education for girls. Thank you. Thank you. Now Costa Rica has the floor. Thank you. Costa Rica welcomes the delegation of Turkey and notes with satisfaction the various measures taken to improve access to education. But we do feel that further work is necessary in order to reduce the very high level of school dropout amongst girls, especially in rural areas and refugee communities. My delegation recommends the following. 1, to ensure the independence and impartiality of the judiciary in law and in practice. Secondly, to ensure that there are spaces for the exercise of the right to peaceful association, freedom of expression and association. Thirdly, to create safe and effective measures to ensure that women, especially refugees, do come forward and report gender-based violence, including sexual violence, and to promote campaigns to encourage them to do so. Thank you very much. Thank you. I now give the floor to Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, we would like to express our condolences in light of the recent earthquake. We thank the delegation for its national report, and we congratulate the Turkish government on the efforts made to implement the recommendations accepted under the second UPR cycle. Côte d'Ivoire commends the elimination of the military justice system, as well as the preparation of a reform strategy for the judiciary 2019-2023. My country encourages the Turkish authorities to continue their efforts to ensure better protection for human rights. We make the following recommendations. Firstly, to consider acceding to the 1954 Convention on the Status of Stateless Persons and the 1906 Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness. And secondly, to take measures to increase the fight against racial discrimination and hate speech. Your time is up. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Croatia.
Thank you, Madam President. Croatia welcomes the delegation of Turkey. We commend the government for the progress achieved since the last UPR session, especially for the establishment of the Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey. We see equal important rising awareness among families regarding the importance of education of girls. We have 3 recommendations. 1. Continue the efforts to promote school attendance of girls, particularly in the rural area. 2. Consider revising current law according to which the right to conscientious objection to military service is a criminal act. 3. Consider the introduction of civil service for conscientious objectors to military service. Croatia wishes the delegation of Turkey a successful review session. I thank you.
Thank you, Croatia. Ahora tiene la palabra Cuba.
Cuba has the floor. Thank you, Madam President. A warm welcome to the delegation of Turkey. Thank you for your report, and we acknowledge your commitment to the UPR. We note the national legislative and policy reforms in various areas affecting human rights. We make the following recommendations. Firstly, to continue strengthening the legal and institutional framework to prevent and respond in a timely manner to cases of abandonment, ill treatment or violence against children and teenagers. Secondly, to keep up the work on the prevention of and address the prevention of human trafficking and protection of victims and international cooperation in this field. We wish Turkey every success in implementation of the recommendations. Thank you very much.
Madam President, Cyprus recommends abide by all UN resolutions regarding human rights violations that implicitly or explicitly refer to Turkey. Implement all ECHR judgments, including the fourth interstate case of Cyprus v. Turkey, where Turkey was found liable. Execute said judgment in individual cases against Turkey regarding violations in Cyprus. Provide the Committee on Missing Persons in Cyprus with all information that the Turkish authority have on possible burial sites, including full access to archives and unrestricted access to military areas. Ratified additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions, accede to the ICC, put an end to arbitrary arrest and detention of journalists, politicians and activists, immediately release those detained on supposed connections to banned organizations, bring anti-terror laws in line with international standards, revoke all decrees and laws associated with the now lifted state of emergency, take effective measures to combat hostile attitudes.
I'm sorry, Cyprus, time's up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Czech Republic has the floor.
Madam President, the Czech Republic welcomes the delegation of Turkey and thanks for its presentation. We appreciate that the state of emergency was revoked. However, we remain concerned about the human rights situation in Turkey and the negative effects of the counterterrorism legislation adopted in 2018. In this context, the Czech Republic makes 4 recommendations. First, ensure respect for the rule of law and independent judiciary and implement the decision of the European Court of Human Rights. Second, ensure full enjoyment of freedoms of expression and assembly and allow free functioning of civil society and media. 3, allow democratically elected representatives to exercise their mandates and stop their replacement by arbitrarily appointed trustees. 4, establish an effective mechanism to prevent torture and humiliating treatment. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Czech Republic. Next speaker is Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. Denmark welcomes the delegation of Turkey. Denmark commends the initial results of the judicial reform strategy. However, we remain concerned about the anti-terrorism law. Denmark recommends the government to bring the anti-terrorism law in line with international human rights standards and to prevent prosecution of journalists and human rights defenders peacefully exercising their human rights. Respecting fundamental freedoms, the rule of law, local governance and election results is central for a functioning democracy. Denmark recommends the government to end the practice of replacing elected mayors with government-appointed trustees before due judicial process is completed. We wish Turkey a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you, Denmark. Next speaker is Djibouti.
Thank you, Madam President. Djibouti welcomes the high-level delegation from Turkey, whom we thank for the detailed presentation of the national report. My delegation commends the participatory and inclusive process that led to the report and Turkey's cooperation with the human rights UN institutions. My delegation also commends Turkey on its commitment and the measures taken since the previous UPR cycle in order to undertake a set of reforms which has helped bring its national legislation into line with international standards and principles. Therefore, we recommend that Turkey continue to implement policies aimed at speeding up and promoting the proper integration of all persons with disabilities into society and the active participation in society, and the same for the participation of women. We wish Turkey every success. Thank you very much.
Return to the Turkish delegation. I give back the floor to His Excellency Mr. Faruk Kaymakci and his delegation to address any observations and comments which have been made so far. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam. Esteemed members of the Troika and distinguished participants, I would like to thank for your contributions as well as messages of condolences, solidarity and sympathy after the earthquake in Elazığ and Malatya in Turkey. In response to some of the recommendations made, I will now provide information on the steps taken on freedom of expression, right to liberty and security, prevention of torture, and freedom of assembly. With regard to freedom of expression, we constantly review our legislation and introduce necessary legal remedies to prevent any violations. To this end, the first judicial reform package added a provision to the anti-terror law. This provision aims to ensure that expression of thoughts that do not go beyond news reporting or made just for criticism should not constitute an offence. It also enabled persons to appeal against the decisions of regional courts of appeal for offences that may have an effect on freedom of expression, such as defamation, incitement to hatred. We already see the positive effects of these amendments. A sizable number of individuals under prosecution have now been released. I hope I answered the advanced questions by Canada, Sweden, Switzerland and the UK, and the recommendations by some countries. It is also important to remember that freedom of expression is not an absolute right. It can be subjected to restriction as prescribed by international human rights treaties. Our priority is to strike a proper balance between protecting fundamental freedoms and maintaining public order and security. You would agree that terrorist propaganda, glorification of terrorism, incitement to hatred and violence are not protected by freedom of expression anywhere. Yet, if there are any violations, appeal of mechanism of Turkish legal system, as well as the Constitutional Court, remedy the situation. In fact, we continue to witness important decisions of high courts that favor freedom of expression over security concerns. With regard to the advanced question by the UK and recommendation by some countries, let me underline that Turkey is a country governed by the rule of law. Hence, no one is above the law. No profession, including journalism, gives persons immunity from prosecution if there is a reasonable suspicion that a crime is committed. Independent courts decide on the merits of each case. We know from court rulings that some persons, disguising themselves as journalists, acted under direct orders from FETÖ terrorist organization in order to advance their illegal activities. Legal action that was taken against this person can in no way be interpreted as limiting freedom of expression. Distinguished participants, now I would like to talk about the steps taken by Turkey on the right to liberty and security. Obviously, certain limitations were introduced during the state of emergency in order to overcome the grave security threats Turkey was faced with. However, these limitations were in line with our international obligations and were given by competent courts. Individuals have the right to challenge these decisions before the courts. We have already seen a drop in detention periods in the past 2 years. Recent amendments introduced by the first judicial legislative package also reduced the length of detention. Madam President, distinguished delegates, Turkey remains fully committed to the policy of zero tolerance against torture. Turkey already had a comprehensive legislative and institutional framework in place to prevent, investigate, prosecute and punish all acts of torture and ill treatment. In the last 5 years, even during the state of emergency, we took further measures to broaden this framework. For example, torture became a ground for dismissal from public service for law enforcement officials with an amendment made in 2017. The Law Enforcement Supervision Commission began its work in September 2019. This is an independent mechanism to effectively investigate all allegations of ill treatment by law enforcement officials. The statute of limitations with regard to the crime of torture was abolished back in 2013. There is no need for a prior permission from authorities to launch an investigation against the public official in cases of allegations of torture. I hope I have given information about the advanced questions of Belgium and Germany and some other recommendations. Our representatives from the Ministry of Justice and Interior will provide further details later on. Meanwhile, we have maintained our cooperation with the international mechanisms, including the Committee on Prevention of Torture of the Council of Europe, SPT, and the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. While I mention the CPT, I would like to make it clear that interinstitutional deliberations are ongoing regarding the publication of the reports of the constructive visits the CPT conducted in the last few years in Turkey. Honourable President, esteemed participants, freedom of assembly and association are also safeguarded by the Constitution. Everyone has the right to hold peaceful demonstrations without any prior permission. In line with the case law of the European Court of Human Rights, restrictions on these rights can be foreseen in the law. They are only implemented to the extent necessary in the interest of national security, public safety, public order, protection of public health or morals, or the protection of the rights of others. Furthermore, between 2015 and 2019, the number of associations increased by 39%, while revenues of associations grew by 107%. Let me also add that there seems to be a widespread misunderstanding concerning the suspension from duty of some mayors. I would like to underline that there are several ongoing investigations and proceedings against these persons for terrorism-related offences and misuse of public funds. As a result of this investigation, their suspension from duty is an interim measure taken in accordance with the Constitution and the relevant legislation. The law on municipalities provides that these measures are reviewed by the authorities every 2 months. Each decision is subjected to judicial review. Mr. President, honourable delegates, before I give the floor to the representatives of the Ministries of Justice and Interior, I would kindly invite certain delegations to stop abusing and politicizing this platform for their own national purposes. We are here today for constructive dialogue, conducting Turkey's UPR based on the 3 reports published beforehand. Therefore, we outright reject all the usual unfounded allegations made by the 2 delegations. Now I would like to turn to our colleagues from the Ministry of Justice to make a statement.
Good morning to all of you. As was clearly underlined by the head of our delegation, judicial reform strategy has been an important component of our reform agenda. Following the lifting of state of emergency, this new judicial reform strategy to be implemented between 2019 and 2023 was prepared with the broadest consultation of all stakeholders, including the academia, civil society, European Union and the Council of Europe. The strategy consists of 2 basic perspectives, 9 goals, 63 targets and 256 activities. 2 main perspectives are to further protect and promote rights and freedoms and to strengthen the independence, impartiality and transparency of the judiciary. In response to advanced question by the Sweden and recommendation by some countries, I would like to inform you that in order to strengthen the independence of the judiciary, the strategy has set a geographical guarantee for judges and prosecutors that prohibits transfer of them to other provinces without their will in certain conditions, and introduced new remedies that extend the rights of judges and prosecutors regarding discipline procedures against them. Within this framework of the judicial reform strategy, the first legislative package was enacted last October. With regard to the advanced question by Canada, Belgium, the UK, Germany and Switzerland, I would like to inform you that the first legislative package has positively affected freedom of expression and other rights and freedoms. Let me underscore some important amendments briefly. Expressions aiming at just reporting or criticizing will not constitute a terrorist propaganda anymore, in line with the standards of case law of the European Court of Human Rights. Further appeal procedures were provided for offences that have direct effect on freedom of expression, such as defamation, incitement to hatred and terrorist propaganda. Simply, the decisions of regional courts of appeal, which were final before the amendment, are now subject to appeal process before the Court of Cassation. Instead of blocking the entire website, access to relevant content in which infringement occurs will be blocked. Blocking of the entire website will be the last resort only when there are technical impossibilities in line with the international standards. More limitations have been brought to existing limit of the length of pretrial detention. The maximum period for investigation phase has been separately and explicitly introduced within the law. The periods of detention are shorter for juvenile suspects. In the coming weeks, new legislative package in the scope of the judicial reform strategy will be submitted to the Parliament. On the other hand, in order to provide the right to be tried in a reasonable time more effectively, as an internal time management system, target time was kicked off in judiciary and maximum periods were determined for each type of proceedings. Mr. President, distinguished participants, the preparation process of the Human Rights Action Plan is ongoing with the broadest participation of different national and international stakeholders. A new project has started to support the preparation and implementation of the Action Plan with the Council of Europe and the EU. The draft plan will then be finalized and made public. The main aim of the Action Plan is to ensure further protection and promotion of rights and freedoms in line with the international standards. In response to the advanced question by the UK and recommendations by some countries, I would like to reiterate that Turkey is in compliance with her international commitments and gives special importance to the full implementation of the European Court of Human Rights judgment. In 2019 alone, the execution of the 732 cases have been finalized and closed by the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. 32 of them were leading cases. On 15 January 2020, Council of Judges and Prosecutors set the promotion criteria for judges and prosecutors. Accordingly, evaluation process also includes an assessment as to whether or not their decisions are in compliance with jurisprudence of the ECHR and the Constitutional Court. In addition, Justice Academy has been restructured and pre-service and in-service human rights trainings of judges and prosecutors continue in an effective manner. Distinguished participants, Turkey has been conducting a comprehensive reform process regarding penitentiary system that covers all aspects. The reform process has three main pillars: modernization of physical infrastructure, enhancing the capacity of human resources in both quality and quantity, reviewing the relevant legislation. In the scope of the first pillar, 347 penitentiary institutions which do not meet the modern standards are closed down. 210 adequate institutions that provide facilities for physical, social, supportive, cultural and labor activities are constructed since 2002. The number of personnel working in penitentiary institutions has increased to 73,000. There are 5 training centers dedicated only to penitentiary personnel, and more than 25,000 personnel have been trained in 2019 alone. In addition, the criminal enforcement legislation has been completely renewed. Probation law has been adopted for implementing alternative solutions to imprisonment. Convicts who cannot be accommodated in penitentiary institutions due to severe illnesses or disabilities can be released until recovery if they do not pose a tangible threat to public security. All medical examinations and treatments are provided free of charge. There are 4 full-fledged penitentiary hospitals and 5 medical centers in 9 different provinces. In total, 1,064 medical personnel are working in penitentiary institutions. We have seen the concrete result of all these efforts. After the July 15 coup attempt, many requests for interim measure concerning the prison conditions have been lodged with the European Court of Human Rights by applicants, mostly affiliated with FETÖ terrorist organizations. The court communicated to our government, 41 of them, that they considered serious. I would like to underline that all of the requests for interim measures have been rejected after the information provided by the government regarding the prison conditions. Distinguished participants, we take any allegations of ill treatment or torture in the penitentiary institutions very seriously and investigate them promptly. The statistics on administrative and criminal proceedings against the staff of the penitentiary institutions in relation to allegations of ill treatment were already provided in our national report. We will continue to strictly uphold our policy of zero tolerance against torture. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks. Madam President, distinguished participants, as the representative of Ministry of Interior, I'd like to underline that while we continue our fight against terrorist organizations, especially PKK, PYD, YPG, FETÖ and Daesh, in a volatile region, we are fully aware of our human rights obligations and take every measure to ensure that our actions are in line with these obligations. Procedural safeguards are important components of our efforts in the prevention of torture and ill treatment. Accordingly, persons under judicial proceedings receive medical examinations at every stage. Relatives of detainees are notified immediately and they are provided with free access to a lawyer. The conditions of all detention rooms are harmonized with the standards set in our legislation, and the detention rooms are monitored with cameras for 24 hours. In response to advanced questions by Switzerland, I would like to share the statistics for investigations of allegations of ill treatment or torture against the law enforcement units for the last 3 years. A total of 40 administrative and judicial investigations were launched in 2017. The number was 33 in 2018 and 20 in 2019. As a result of effective investigations, disciplinary actions were imposed on 9 personnel. To increase the effectiveness of the investigations and prevent impunity, the Law Enforcement Supervision Commission was established. The Commission guarantees that investigations of torture allegations against law enforcement officers are meticulously followed and that no application is disregarded. After the appointment of the members of the Commission and the enactment of the necessary secondary legislation, the Commission has started its monthly meetings in September 2019 and received 19 applications so far. With regard to freedom of assembly, necessary measures are taken by the provincial and district governorates to ensure that peaceful demonstrations are held in a safe and free environment. Law enforcement agencies also work to ensure that demonstrations are held peacefully. On average, more than 30 million people annually participate in meetings and demonstrations in Turkey, and around 99.3% of these activities are held safely and without any interference. Over the last 5 years, while the number of demonstrations rose 5% and the number of people attending these demonstrations rose 24%, the intervention rate dropped from 3.2 to 0.7, which is a 78% decrease. The intervention rate shows that peaceful and lawful activities are held without any obstacles. With regard to the advanced questions by Belgium and the UK, between 2015 and 2019, LGBTI organizations held 97 activities in different cities. Nearly 20,000 people have participated in these events. Only only 119 people were charged due to their violent illegal actions. This proves that there is not a systematic ban or charge concerning LGBTI events. Furthermore, Galatasaray Square in Beyoğlu district, where Saturday mothers want to assemble and organize a sit-in protest, is not listed among the routes for demonstrations. These routes are determined in consultations with civil society, political parties and relevant municipalities. Galatasaray Square and Istiklal Avenue are central touristic areas where nearly 2 million people walk, visit or pass by each day. This ban on holding demonstrations on these venues apply to all groups without discrimination. It is not specific to Saturday mothers or LGBTI. Decisive steps are taken to guarantee that interventions are proportional. The law on meetings and demonstrations was amended to allow meetings and demonstrations in open areas to be held until midnight. The new regulation on the use of tear gas and tear gas rifles has unified implementation in practice. Numerous trainings on negotiating methods and proportional use of force are given to civil administration and law enforcement officials. For example, nearly 186,000 law enforcement officers, including police and gendarmerie, have received trainings on intervention methods and tactics, whereas almost 332,000 law enforcement officers received training on human rights. Almost 12,000 police received trainings on the use of tear gas and tear gas rifles. Thank you very much.
Now we are ready to listen to the next 44 countries in the list of speakers.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And the next country is the Dominican Republic.
Gracias, señora Presidenta. Thank you, Madam President. The delegation of the Dominican Republic bids a very cordial welcome to the Turkish delegation and thanks it for presenting its report. We have the following respectful recommendations. 1, to consolidate achievements in promoting rights, inclusion, equal opportunities, the well-being of women and girls under the aegis of national programs. 2, to take further measures to extend health coverage and make it universal. And 3, take additional measures to protect the rights and well-being of children and adolescents. We lastly commend Turkey on improvements to domestic and institutional frameworks, as well as promoting and protecting human rights. We wish Turkey every success. Thank you. Ecuador has the floor. Thank you, Madam President. Ecuador extends a cordial welcome to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Turkey and distinguished delegation. We recognise Turkey's progress since the last cycle, particularly the ratification of the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In a constructive spirit, we have the following recommendations. 1, to eradicate mentions of honour crimes in the criminal code and strengthen measures to put a stop to discriminatory stereotypes against women, their role in the family and society. Adopt measures to tackle inequalities faced by Kurdish women, including access to health and education. And 3, adopt a comprehensive act to fight human trafficking. We wish Turkey every success in its UPR adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. We provide the following recommendation. First, take prompt measures to uphold international commitment and the international law of human rights, ensure human rights to all without distinction, and respect international standards of due process, as well as reform laws which impinge on freedoms of expression and opinion. Second, conduct investigation in acts of torture and ill treatment during detention and take legal measures to bring these acts to an end and prevent impunity and ensure compensation for victims. Third, repeal unlawful layoffs from public office and the removal of elected officials from their positions and release those who were detained. Second, put an end to the intervention of the executive authority in the judiciary, and we would like to express our concerns about violations in prisons. Arisa
has the floor. Ambassador, please. Thank you, Madam President. Estonia welcomes the delegation of Turkey. We welcome the efforts of Turkey to improve the independence, impartiality and transparency of its judiciary and encourage enhancing it further by ensuring for a full separation of powers. Estonia commends Turkey's efforts in hosting the world's largest refugee population. We recommend the following. Accede to and fully align its national legislation with the Rome Statute of the ICC. Decriminalize defamation and ensure that the right to freedom of expression is consistent with international human rights standards. Explicitly criminalize gender-based and domestic violence. Establish independent mechanisms for reporting and investigation of allegations of unlawful detention, torture and inhuman treatment in hands of police and security forces. Finally, we urge Turkey to protect democratic values by bringing its national legislation in counter-terrorism in line with international standards. We wish the delegation successful review meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ethiopia, please.
Madam President, Ethiopia welcomes the high-level delegation of Turkey. We positively note steps taken by Turkey, such as the adoption of strategies towards promoting preschool education in rural areas by introducing mobile teachers' classroom program. We also congratulate Turkey for benefiting over 10,000 visually impaired students through its inclusive education program, whereby Braille devices capable of storing 300,000 books are distributed. Ethiopia wishes to make the following recommendation. Redouble is safer to ensure children who drop out of school due to financial difficulties continue their compulsory education. We wish Turkey every success in this review. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Fiji.
Thank you, Madam President. Fiji welcomes the delegation of Turkey and congratulates the delegation for the achievements in the implementation of the recommendations from its previous cycle. Fiji commends Turkey for the measures taken to address climate change, in particular its national climate change strategy and its climate change policy. Fiji offers the following recommendations. 1. Continue to ensure that its climate change and disaster risk reduction policies are gender responsive and disability inclusive, consistent with the UNFCCC and Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. 2. Include evidence-based and age-appropriate comprehensive sexuality education in school curricula. And 3. Strengthen efforts to ensure the effective investigation, prosecution and punishment for all acts of torture and ill treatment, and provide access to justice and rehabilitation to victims of torture. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiji. Next speaker is Finland.
Thank you, Madam President. Finland thanks Turkey for its national report. Finland is seriously concerned about human rights situation in Turkey and wishes to make the following recommendations. First, Finland recommends Turkey to ensure that its freedom of assembly, expression and association laws fully meet human rights obligations and are fully implemented. Second, Finland recommends Turkey to implement its anti-discrimination legislation and to extend it to include sexual orientation and gender identity. Third, Finland recommends Turkey to reform the judicial system and to ensure independent and impartial investigation, prosecution and trial. And fourth, Finland recommends Turkey to ensure free and safe space for civil society, including human rights defenders, in full accordance with the international human rights obligation. I wish the Turkish delegation successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Finland. Je donne la parole à l'ambassadeur de France.
I give the floor to the French ambassador. Thank you, Madam President. Despite certain recent improvements in general, France notices a sharp downturn in human rights and rule of law in Turkey. We recommend 1. Assure judicial independence by reforming the conditions for appointing the governing council of judges and prosecutors. Ensure effective right of appeal for measures taken during the state of emergency. 3. Enforce ECHR rulings. 4. Adopt legal measures to protect vulnerable sectors, particularly from violence and hate speech. 5. Amend the Counterterrorism Act, bring it into line with Turkey's international commitments, notably when it comes to the freedom to demonstrate, expression and press freedoms, and make the NHRI operational independent. We wish Turkey every success. Thank you, Ambassador. I now give the floor to Gabon. Thank you, Madam President. Gabon welcomes the Turkish delegation and thanks it for presenting its national report. We congratulate Turkey on all the reforms undertaken to promote and protect the rights of vulnerable groups, including women. We commend you on establishing the Ombudsman Office in line with the Paris Principles and how independent and effective it is thanks to the Constitution and its establishing decree. We encourage Turkey to pursue this path and recommend that you take extra efforts to fight female unemployment, discrimination against women and to fight domestic violence. We wish Turkey every success in the review. Thank you, Madam President.
Georgia, please.
Thank you, Madam President. We welcome the delegation of Turkey and thank the head of delegation for the presentation of the national report. We appreciate Turkey's annual contributions to the OHCHR and we value Turkey's commitment to host almost 4 million refugees. Georgia positively evaluates the fact that Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to freedom of opinion and expression, and the UN Special Rapporteur on torture visited Turkey in reporting period. We welcome the ratification of the optional protocol to the Convention of the Rights of the Child on a communication procedures. Herewith, we recommend Turkey, first, to continue cooperation with the UN human rights machinery, and second, to proceed with the steps towards fulfillment of the National Action Plan on Gender Equality 2015-2020. I thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I now give the floor to Germany.
Madam President, Germany welcomes steps taken by Turkey to implement its judicial reform strategy. Germany recommends 1. Repeal all provisions that restrict judicial and prosecutorial independence, including those that allow the executive to appoint a large number of members of the Council of Judges and Prosecutors, as well as to the Constitutional Court. 2. Amend Article 7.2 of the anti-terrorism law to ensure that only incitement to violence is prohibited. Align counter-terrorism laws with international human rights standards. End excessive prosecution of human rights defenders, journalists and civil society representatives under the pretext of fighting terrorism. 3. Prevent misuse of provisions concerning public order, public health and public morale to ensure freedom of assembly and association for all citizens, including LGBTI persons. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Next speaker is Ghana, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Ghana welcomes the delegation of Turkey and commend the progress made by Turkey in the last couple of years to promote and protect human rights and the principle of rule of law. We note in particular the constitutional amendment in 2017 and the ratification of the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Ghana wishes to make the following 2 recommendations. 1. Consider to ratify outstanding core international human rights treaties and conventions. Of note is the Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. And 2. Continue efforts to eliminate acts of torture and ill treatment and hold perpetrators accountable. Ghana wishes Turkey every success with this review. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Greece. Ambassador, please.
Thank you. Greece welcomes the delegation of Turkey and wishes to offer the following recommendations. Comply with the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights concerning the rights of the Greek citizens to inherit immovable property in Turkey. Comply with the ECHR judgments concerning human rights violations in the occupied areas of Cyprus not under the effective control of the government of the Republic of Cyprus. Grant the Ecumenical Patriarchate legal personality. Reopen the Chalkid Seminary to solve the problems that its closing continues to cause. End the 7-year regulatory gap and proceed without further delay to the adoption and implementation of new electoral regulations so that Turkish citizens belonging to non-Muslim communities be able to elect their leadership and thus manage their charitable foundations. Allow children of Greek citizens working in Istanbul to enroll to Greek minority schools and grant them equivalent diploma upon completion of their studies. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ambassador. Le prochain orateur, c'est Haïti.
The next speaker is Haiti. Thank you, Madam President. Haiti bids a warm welcome to Turkish delegation to its 3rd UPR and thanks it for presenting its national report. In a constructive spirit, we have 3 recommendations for the Turkish authorities. 1. Step up efforts to ensure the freedom of religion and belief in law and in practice, in particular in the media. 2. Take all necessary measures in light of domestic and international law to protect academic autonomy and associated rights. And 3. Repeal discriminatory provisions against persons with disabilities and align your anti-discrimination laws with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to Honduras. Thank you, Madam President. Honduras welcomes the distinguished Turkish delegation and thanks it for presenting its report. We have the following respectful recommendations. 1. Ratify the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. 2. Adopt an Anti-Discrimination Act to prevent any form of discrimination on the grounds of ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation or gender identity. 3. Ratify the International Convention to protect all persons from enforced disappearance. And 4. Ratify the Convention, the UNESCO Convention on Discrimination Education. We congratulate you on your progress and the results obtained in implementing recommendations from previous UPRs, notably the ratification of the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We wish Turkey every success in this review. Thank you, Madam President.
Please.
Thank you, Madam President. Hungary welcomes the delegation of Turkey. Turkey hosts the world's largest number of refugees and asylum seekers, which raises enormous challenges for the host country. The fact that Turkey opened its doors for many Syrians and offered them the possibility to remain as close as possible to their country of origin is commendable.
We note with appreciation that by September 2019, more than 63% of Syrian children were enrolled in education, also welcomes Turkey's close cooperation with countries of origin with the aim of effectively combating irregular migration. Hungary values the fact that inclusiveness is among the key principles of the national curriculum at all stages of compulsory education. We wish to make the following recommendations: adopt a comprehensive anti-trafficking law and continue efforts to prevent, suppress...
Sorry, Hungary, time's up. Iceland, please, Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam President. Iceland welcomes the delegation of Turkey and makes the following recommendations. 1. Guarantee the freedom of thought and religion and the rights to freedom of information and freedom of expression, and ensure that human rights defenders and journalists can carry out their legitimate and peaceful activities without fear of attack or reprisal. 2. Condemn hate speech and hate crimes towards LGBTI individuals, effectively investigate and prosecute such cases, and lift the ban on LGBTI events and pride marches. 3. Strengthen the rule of law and ensure the independence of the judiciary and prohibit executive branch interference with or attempts to exert influence over the judiciary. 4. Develop an evidence-based comprehensive sexuality education curriculum based on the human rights principle. I wish Turkey all success for its review. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next speaker is India.
Madam President, India welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey and recommends the following to Turkey. Strengthen the legislative framework to eradicate child marriages, including unregistered religious marriages, in order to guarantee the rights of all married women and their children. Improve access to sexual and reproductive health services, especially for Kurdish women and other minority women, and for the women living in rural and remote areas, and avoid early and unwanted pregnancies. Ensure the functional, structural and financial independence of the human rights and equality institution, and guarantee that the appointment of its members is in full compliance with the Paris principles. Adopt a comprehensive anti-trafficking law and continue efforts to prevent, suppress and punish trafficking in persons in line with the target 5.2 of the Sustainable Development Goals. We wish Turkey all the very best.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam President. Indonesia would like to express our condolences for the victims of the recent earthquake in Turkey. Indonesia commends Turkey for the announcement of the planned judicial reform strategy, particularly as it relates to efforts in addressing trafficking in person. On top of such positive developments, Indonesia recommends the following. 1. To further strengthen efforts in countering human trafficking and protection of trafficking victims, and to consider the early finalization of the National Human Rights Action Plan as a key fixture in the advancement of human rights, democratization and law enforcement in Turkey. In this regard, Indonesia stands ready to enhance bilateral cooperation with Turkey to achieve our common endeavors in the promotion and protection of human rights. We wish the government of Turkey a successful review. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Iraq, please.
We welcome the head and members of the delegation and congratulate you on the participatory approach in preparing the report. You've also welcomed special rapporteurs, which we congratulate you on, as well as your plans to promote and protect human rights. Nevertheless, we're worried about the effects on the institutional economic fabric of certain security measures. We have the following recommendations: to ratify the International Convention to protect all persons from enforced disappearances, and to respect the sovereignty of neighbouring countries, and to deploy further efforts to prevent human trafficking in women and girls in your country and across your borders.
Thank you, Madam President. Ireland warmly welcomes the delegation of Turkey and thanks them for their presentation. We welcome the efforts of Turkey on certain issues, such as children's rights, since the last UPR cycle. Ireland remains concerned by continued pressure on the rule of law and on civil society space. Ireland makes the following recommendations to the Turkish authorities. 1. Ensure the creation of a safe, enabling environment for journalists, human rights defenders and civil society, both online and offline. 2. Ensure that the application of anti-terror legislation is fully consistent with Turkey's human rights obligations and international standards, and ensure that those arrested on terror-related charges are afforded due process. We wish Turkey every success with this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Italy. Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Italy welcomes the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey, His Excellency Faruk Kamakci, and his delegation. Italy recommends Turkey to take appropriate measures to protect freedom of expression, assembly and association, as well as to guarantee a safe and enabling environment for civil society organizations, human rights defenders and journalists, including by defining limitation to fundamental freedoms in compliance with international obligations. Strengthen the independence of the judiciary, ensure that all allegations of arbitrary detention, torture and inhumane treatments by security forces are duly investigated, take further measures to prevent any form of discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, combat all harmful practices against women and girls, including child, early and forced marriage. Italy wishes Turkey a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Next speaker is Japan, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Japan highly commends Turkey for accepting refugees from Syria and providing financial support. We welcome its measures to protect the rights of refugees. Japan also appreciates the establishment of a government bureau for preventing domestic violence and violence against women. Japan offers 2 recommendations. 1. Increase efforts to promote and protect women's rights, including prevention of domestic violence against women. And 2. Take further measures to promote freedom of expression in the press, including fostering a political and social environment that more broadly embraces media activities. We wish the delegation of Turkey every success in this review. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next speaker is Jordan, please. Can I invite Jordan to take the floor? Are you here? No. If that's not the case, we go on to Kenya, please. Is Kenya present? Okay.
Thank you, Madam President. Kenya warmly welcomes His Excellency Farouk Mashik, Ambassador, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Director of EU, and his delegation to their UPR, and thank them for their comprehensive national report. Kenya commends Turkey for taking positive measures to implement their international obligations on human rights. These include the constitutional amendments by referendum on 16th April 2017, adoption on an inclusive judicial reform strategy, and ratifying 2 optional protocols on the rights of the child, on communications procedure, and on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. In this spirit, Kenya recommends to Turkey to take further measures to resource the Ombudsman and the Human Rights Equality Institution of Turkey in line with the Paris Principles. 2.
I'm sorry, time's up, Kenya. Thank you very much. Kuwait, please.
My delegation welcomes the delegation of friendly Turkey and thank it for its presentation of its national report and the review. We recognize Turkey's efforts in the protection of human rights, including the adoption of various plans and adopted various measures, including the judicial reform strategy and the enforcement of ombudsman institution, as well as living up to international conventions and cooperation of human rights treaty bodies, as well as supporting efforts in order to enforce human rights. We would like to offer the following recommendation: review legislations and conduct amendments in order to enforce human rights and freedoms. In closing, we wish Turkey success in the UPR, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Kyrgyzstan, please.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey and thanks for the presentation of its national report today. We welcome Turkey's ongoing efforts in bringing its legislation in line with its international human rights obligations and legal reforms that have been carried out since the 2nd cycle of the UPR. In particular, establishment of the Reform Action Group under the chairmanship of the President in May 2019 and new judicial reform strategy aimed at strengthening the rule of law. In this regard, we would like to recommend to Turkey the following. First, continue its comprehensive reforms in the field of human rights, and second, increase women's participation in all forms of decision-making to ensure even greater participation by women in leadership roles. In conclusion, my delegation wishes Turkey every success at this review. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Lebanon.
Madam President, the delegation of Lebanon takes note of the adoption by Turkey of the judicial reform strategy and its continued efforts to consolidate compulsory education of girls. We recommend continuing anti-trafficking efforts and to continue to consult with non-Muslim minorities to draw up regulations that address the difficulties these minorities face in the election of members of the boards of administration of their institutions. Thank you.
Much. Next speaker is Libya. You don't wish to speak? Thank you very much. Next speaker is Lithuania, then Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam President. Lithuania welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey. Hoş geldiniz. We express our deepest condolences to Turkey over the recent deadly earthquake. We wish to recommend to Turkey, first, to continue to uphold the principle of gender equality in national legislation and policies and enhance the efforts to effectively implement it, especially in the areas of decision-making, employment, education and health, and ensure that all reports of gender-based violence are duly investigated. Second, to adopt legislative arrangements and specific measures implementing the judicial reform strategy, inter alia as part of ensuring media freedom and freedom of opinion and expression both online and offline. We wish Turkey a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now give the floor to Luxembourg. Thank you, Madam President. Luxembourg also welcomes the delegation from Turkey. We thank them for the presentation of the national report. We commend some positive developments in Turkey during the period under review, including the adoption of the reform strategy for the judiciary. That said, significant structural and operational changes in this field are still required. We make the following 4 recommendations to Turkey. Firstly, to put an end to prolonged and arbitrary detention of journalists, writers and civil society representatives, including Mr. Osman Kavala. Secondly, to eliminate all restrictions on the freedom to demonstrate, including for events organized by the LGBTI community. Thirdly, to ensure the structural, operational and financial impartiality and independence of the National Human Rights and Equality Institution. And fourthly, to sign and ratify the ICC's Statute of Rome. Thank you. Malaysia, please.
Madam President, Malaysia thanks Turkey for the detailed presentation of its national report. Malaysia takes note of the various measures undertaken by Turkey to implement recommendations from its second UPR. Malaysia also lauds Turkey's efforts to host a large number of refugees. The international community must continue to assist. Herewith, Malaysia recommends 1. Continue promoting the rights of persons with disabilities, including by harmonizing its anti-discrimination legislation with the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. 2. Continue upholding the rights of children, including by ensuring the effective implementation of national program for combating child labor. And 3. Continue its efforts to provide education opportunities for all children, particularly those belonging to vulnerable groups. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is the Maldives.
Thank you, Madam President. The Maldives warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey, and we thank the delegation for their presentation today. In constructive spirit, the Maldives presents the following 2 recommendations to Turkey. 1. Strengthen efforts to bring national legislation on defamation and countering terrorism in line with international standards. 2. Ensure effective implementation of the strategy document and national action plan on combating early and forced marriage. The Maldives welcomes Turkey's recent launch of judicial reform strategy to strengthen the rule of law and respect for human rights. We wish Turkey every success at this review. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ambassador. Le prochain orateur, c'est le... The next speaker is Mali, please. Thank you, Madam President. Mali extends a warm welcome to the delegation of the Republic of Turkey. We thank the delegation for the presentation of its 3rd national report. My delegation would like to commend the great level of implementation for recommendations made under the previous UPR cycle, and we also note with satisfaction Turkey's regular submission of periodic reports under the treaty bodies. We commend the authorities' commitment to improving the human rights situation back home, and we encourage the authorities to step up its cooperation with the Human Rights Council and its mechanisms. We wish you every success. Thank you. Malta, please.
President, Malta welcomes the delegation of Turkey and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. We have taken note of Turkey's particular context during the period under review. We welcome the government's efforts to combat discrimination against LGBTI persons, especially the assistance it is affording to such persons in detention. In this context, Malta would like to recommend to the government of Turkey the following. 1. Condemn hate speech and hate crimes targeting LGBTI persons. 2. Consider lifting the ban on LGBTI events in Ankara and protect pride marches and other demonstrations. 3. Consider including LGBTI organizations and involve their civil society representatives within the government's decision-making processes. We wish the delegation of Turkey a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next speaker is Mauritania.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We welcome the high-ranking delegation of Turkey and thank it for its presentation of valuable national report. We applaud Turkey's efforts with regards to legislative reforms to meet its international human rights obligations in the wake of its second UPR review. We welcome Turkey's cooperation by submitting its periodic reports to human rights treaty bodies. In a spirit of positive cooperation, I would like to provide the two following recommendations. First, effectively implement Judicial Reform Strategy 2019-2023 and achieve their goals. Second, further bolster the role of Ombudsman institution to ensure oversight and investigation in the field of human rights. In closing, we wish a successful UPR for Turkey and thank you.
Thank you very much. Tiene la palabra.
Mexico has the floor. Thank you, Madam President. Our sincere condolences to Turkey following the recent earthquake. We also acknowledge Turkey's efforts to protect vulnerable persons, in particular refugees. We make the following respectful recommendations. 1. To enhance access to legal aid and interpreters for asylum seekers at border crossings and migration centres. Secondly, to ensure the right to freedom of assembly and association, in particular by eliminating prohibitions on events organised by the LGBTI community. And thirdly, to ensure that the anti-terrorist legislation and decreed state of emergency situations do not undermine the ability of citizens, including journalists, to exercise their right to freedom of opinion and expression. Thank you. Thank you very much. Montenegro, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Montenegro welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey. We commend commitment of the government to strengthen the capacities of all relevant public institutions dealing with the human rights. We appreciate and welcome the efforts of Turkey to ensure protection for millions of displaced persons and refugees from Syria and other third countries, particularly providing multi-sectoral support for minors. We also recognize and experience that such situations are complex and can be challenging for any host country, and they oblige us, all of us, to even more protect and promote human rights. We welcome the activities of the government in prevention of any kind of discrimination, particularly promotion and protection of women's rights. Montenegro recommends first to take further steps in encouraging inclusive education of disabled children. Second, to continue providing equal opportunities for girls in education and in society. We wish friendly Turkey every success in this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Next speaker is Morocco, please.
Thank you, Madam President. A warm welcome to the delegation of the Republic of Turkey. Thank you for your national report. Following the recommendations made under the previous cycle, Morocco is pleased that Turkey has undertaken legal reforms, such as the creation of the ombudsperson and the promotion of the impartiality of the judiciary, which has been strongly underscored in the country's constitution. Progress made with respect to compliance with international human rights mechanisms, both in law and in practice, and the strengthening of national human rights institutions remain a significant part of what has been done. My delegation has the following recommendation: to continue efforts aimed at reviewing the legislation on the creation of the National Human Rights Institution to include obligations in the field of non-discrimination and equality. Thank you. Myanmar, please.
Madam President, my delegation welcomes the delegation of Turkey to this review and thanks them for the report. Myanmar acknowledges the reform measures taken by Turkey in the legal framework. However, many challenges remain in Turkey and violence against women still constitutes a serious concern. In a constructive spirit, Myanmar wishes to recommend Turkey as follows. 1. to increase efforts to fulfill its obligation on gender equality under international conventions. 2, to set up measures for effective empowerment of women. And 3, to make efforts to reduce discrimination and social isolation due to sexual orientation. We wish Turkey a successful review. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Namibia.
Thank you, Madam President. Namibia warmly welcomes the delegation of Turkey and makes the following recommendations for consideration. 1. Take effective measures to eliminate the harmful practice of child early and forced marriage. And 2. Step up government efforts to eliminate child and forced labor. Madam President, while commending the positive human rights impact measures taken by Turkey during the period under review, Namibia is concerned about the proposed Marry Your Rapist bill, which is due for consideration by lawmakers in Turkey. We urge the government of Turkey to ensure that this proposed legislation does not see the light of the day. We wish the delegation of Turkey a successful review. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Namibia. Next speaker is Nepal, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Nepal welcomes the delegation of Turkey to the third cycle of UPR. We appreciate Turkey's constructive engagement in this process. Nepal recommends Turkey the following for their consideration. 1. Continue to strengthen the functioning of human rights and equality institution of Turkey in accordance with the Paris Principles. 2. Continue measures on women's empowerment and enhance their participation in all fields of society. Madam President, Nepal welcomes the initiatives taken by Turkey to increase women's participation in the economic spheres. The tax exemption provided to the employers for the provision of nursery or daycare benefits to the children of women employees is noteworthy. Nepal wishes Turkey a successful review. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And at this stage, I pass back the floor to the Turkish delegation, to His Excellency Mr. Faruk Kaymakci. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam President, esteemed members of the Troika and distinguished participants. We are talking about too much of women. Look at my delegation. I am probably the only man in the delegation. So, Madam President, I would like to thank all the contributions. In response to some of your recommendations, I will now provide information on non-discrimination, freedom of religion, minority rights, as well as protection of the rights of refugees. Combating all forms of discrimination and achievement of equality for all of our citizens have been at the heart of Turkey's reform process. From introduction of Kurdish language courses to lifting the ban on headscarves and to the return of properties belonging to community foundations, our government has made important progress to ensure that every individual, be it a woman, member of a religious minority, a person with a different background or a lifestyle, enjoys his or her rights without any discrimination. In response to the advanced questions by Sweden and Canada, Article 10 of the Constitution guarantees equality before the law, irrespective of language, race, color, sex, political opinion, philosophical belief, religion, and sect, or any such consideration. The phrase "any such considerations" ensures that the grounds for the prohibition of discrimination are not limited to those listed. Therefore, the absence of a specific reference to sexual orientation in the legislation does not mean that discrimination on that ground is allowed. Furthermore, already back in 2013, the democratization package introduced legal amendments for a more effective fight against hate crimes and discrimination. Concerning the advanced questions by Germany, Canada, the Human Rights and Equality Institution was established in 2016 in conformity with Paris Principles. It has administrative and financial autonomy as well as a private budget. Its establishment law expanded the grounds of discrimination. The institution is also designated as the national preventive mechanism in the context of the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. One of the objectives of the institution is to be accredited to the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. To that end, a capacity assessment project was carried out in September 2019 in collaboration with the UN. Final report of that assessment will provide a roadmap for the accreditation procedure. The visibility and credibility of the Ombudsman institution has strengthened in the last years. There is a significant increase in the number of applications made to the institution. Furthermore, the compliance rate of public institutions with Ombudsman decisions rose from 20% to 70% between 2013 and 2018. Distinguished participants, freedom of religion and respect for religious diversity are deeply rooted in our nation's history and traditions, as well as in our legislation. In accordance with the Laws and Peace Treaty of 1923, non-Muslim minorities have their own schools, places of worship, foundations, hospitals, and media organizations. Their places of worship are administered by their own associations or foundations. Non-Muslim citizens hold religious ceremonies freely. Their places of worship have been renovated and reopened for service. The Grand Synagogue in Edirne, Sveti Stefan Bulgarian Church in Istanbul are just a few recent examples. A new Assyrian church is being built from scratch in Istanbul. Significant progress has been made on return of immovable properties of non-Muslim foundations. 56 immovable properties in Mardin were registered to Assyrian community foundations. The number of properties registered to foundations belonging to Armenian, Assyrian, Chaldean, Greek and Bulgarian foundations since 2003 has reached over 1,000. With regard to minority schools, Gökçeada Greek Private Middle School and High School were renovated and opened in 2015. In the current school year, around 3,700 students are enrolled in 59 minority schools. These students also benefit from government's financial support. Furthermore, 2000 circular of the Ministry of National Education simplified the procedure for enrollment to minority schools. The joint declaration of 2018 by the representative of the Turkish religious communities, namely the Greek Orthodox Patriarch, General Vicar of the Armenian Patriarch of Turkey, and the Chief Rabbi of Turkey, as well as Syriac, Chaldean, and Protestant representatives, emphasize that they freely practice their faith and experience no pressure on their communities. This is the best confirmation of religious freedom in Turkey. In response to the advanced question by Canada, programs and ceremonies are organized for our Alevi citizens, as well, especially during significant dates. Opinions and recommendations of the Alevi community leaders were taken into consideration while preparing the sections in textbooks of the culture of religion and knowledge of ethics classes regarding the Alevis. In line with the needs and aspirations of our citizens, public schools started offering Albanian and Bosnian classes in addition to elective courses on Kurdish, Circassian, Georgian and Laz. Honorable President, distinguished participants, for the last 9 years, Turkey has mobilized its financial and human resources to address the plight of refugees fleeing persecution, wars and internal conflicts without any discrimination. With around 4 million externally displaced persons, including approximately 3.6 million Syrians, Turkey is home to the largest refugee population in the world. We continue to improve their living conditions. Turkey granted Syrians temporary protection status as they were forced to cross our borders in masses, seeking immediate protection. They enjoy similar rights granted to refugees under the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. The law on foreigners and international protection guarantees all their fundamental rights, including the right of access to health care, education services and labour market. Turkey attaches particular importance to ensure the right to education of all Syrians under temporary protection, in order to facilitate their social cohesion and financial independence. Today, around 685,000 of over 1 million school-age Syrian children are enrolled in education. In the last 5 years, education rate among refugees has increased from 30% to 63%. Higher education rate of Syrians is 7% in Turkey, while the global ratio is just 1%. All Syrians under temporary protection also benefit healthcare services free of charge. Emergency treatment is provided to those in need immediately after they cross into Turkey. Migrant health centers were built with bilingual personnel as well as Syrian doctors and nurses in provinces where we have high population of refugees. Other services provided to refugees also serve as a benchmark for the world. During the Global Refugee Forum held in Geneva last month, Turkey shared far more good practices than any other country. Unaccompanied minors and separated refugee children are placed and looked after in state shelters under the authority of the Ministry of Family, Labour and Social Services. The law on foreigners and international protection includes special provisions for processing asylum applications of unaccompanied children. Accordingly, while their cases are being evaluated, the best interest of the child must be observed and the children must quickly receive their international protection ID. Our authorities spare no effort for funding, locating and identifying the relatives of the children and ensure that children are safely united with their relatives. Turkey acts in line with its international obligations stemming from non-refoulement principle. This principle is also enshrined in the law on foreigners and international protection. Accordingly, no Syrian is returned to Syria against his or her will. For Syrians willing to return to their countries, their returns should be safe, voluntary and dignified. A voluntary repatriation request form in Arabic is issued. This form is first signed by the representative of the UNHCR in order to prevent any arbitrary practice in the voluntary repatriation process. Persons under temporary and international protection in Turkey are required to reside in the provinces where they are referred to by the Directorate General of Migration Management during their registration. This practice aims to provide foreigners essential services such as education and healthcare. However, if they wish to change their province due to important reasons such as education and family reunification, they can apply to the Directorate General of Migration Management and their requests are looked into diligently. Turkey also takes decisive actions against human trafficking and cooperates closely with civil society to help protect and assist victims of trafficking in persons. In the last 5 years, we adopted the regulation against human trafficking and protection of victims and established Coordination Commission against human trafficking. Turkey also ratified the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings in 2016. Protection desks were established in 50 provinces to prevent possible victimization of vulnerable Syrian women and children. 2 shelters for victims of human trafficking were opened in Kırıkkale and in Ankara. Madam President, it is sad to see some other countries abusing this platform for their own political ends. I will not repeat what I said earlier about politicizing our UPR. Nevertheless, let me clarify that our position on the issue of Cyprus is very well known. It is not Turkey which created the problem in Cyprus. In fact, this is not the right place to speak of the realities regarding the creation and the perpetuation of the Cyprus problem. The existence of the Turkish troops on the island stems from the 1960 international treaties within the framework of Turkey's rights and obligations as a guarantor power. Furthermore, concerning the issues like the missing persons, property, freedom of religion in Cyprus, etc., these kinds of topics fall completely within the competence of the Turkish Cypriot authorities. I don't think that we will find a solution to the Cyprus problem here in this meeting or in the mountains of Switzerland. Maybe Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots, if they can speak wholeheartedly and if they seriously want a solution, I think they can find a solution on the island of Cyprus. Also, there was a question of neighboring countries. When there is a security threat in the neighborhood, Turkey is entitled to exercise its inherent right of self-defense emanating from the UN Charter and relevant UN Security Council resolutions in response to the threats to its national security. However, let me underline that Turkey fully respects the territorial integrity and unity and sovereignty of its neighbors. I think I will stop here and we can listen to some more countries.
Thank you very much. And the next country now is the Netherlands.
Madam President, the Kingdom of the Netherlands thanks the delegation of the Republic of Turkey for the presentation of its national report and offers its condolences.
Sorry, Netherlands, can you stop a moment? I think we have a point of order from Cyprus. Only for a point of order.
Madam President, thank you. This is not the forum to deal with issues that are outside the mandate of the UPR working group. Beyond substantive problems, including terminology and misrepresentation, procedurally, these last statements by the state under examination contravene the rules of procedure of the UPR working group, whereby all recommendations made during the review should be treated equally and subsequently listed in the body of the report. It is therefore imperative that all erroneous references, including the use of non-UN terminology, are omitted from the record and the report of the meeting, and for Turkey to cease further politicising this process. I would therefore kindly ask, Madam President, that you reiterate to all delegations, including the delegation under review, the necessity to abide by the rules and procedures governing the UPR working group, whereby all UN member states are treated with full respect and on an equal footing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would just like to recall that the UPR is not the forum to deal with bilateral, political, territorial or whatever other questions. We are talking about the UPR agenda, and the Secretariat is instructed to use UN terminology. That is an obvious fact. Thank you very much, and with that we return to the Netherlands. You have the floor, sir.
Madam President, the Kingdom of the Netherlands thanks the delegation of the Republic of Turkey for the presentation of its national report and offers its condolences for the victims of the recent earthquake. The Netherlands remains concerned about the broader human rights situation and therefore recommends Turkey as a democratic constitutional state to 1. Strengthen its separation of powers by rolling back the constitutional amendment of Article 159 in order to improve the independence of the Council of the Judges and Prosecutors, and by introducing a vertical system of appeal for rulings of peace judges. 2. To improve freedom of assembly by repealing bans on peaceful gatherings, including those of the LGBTI community, as well as freedom of expression by implementing Article 7 of the anti-terrorism law, which states that criticism cannot be criminalized, and by decriminalizing Articles 216, 299 and 301 of the Penal Code. The Netherlands notes Turkey's judicial reform strategy, which contains first steps towards addressing concerns on the rule of law and human rights. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is New Zealand.
Thank you, Madam President. New Zealand commends the Republic of Turkey for its generous hosting of over 3.6 million Syrian refugees and acknowledges its commitment to the 16 UN human rights instruments to which it is a signatory. New Zealand notes the lifting of the state of emergency in Turkey in July 2018, but remains concerned that some of the restrictions put in place following the unfortunate 2016 coup attempt can be used to silence legitimate political dissent. We recommend that Turkey take steps to encourage freedom of expression, including freedom of the press, association and peaceful assembly, and to align its legislation in this respect with its obligations and commitments under relevant international law. Ensure that human rights defenders, lawyers and journalists are not subjected to intimidation or arbitrary arrest in undertaking their work. Ensure full compliance with international humanitarian law and human rights law by its forces, and does not provide support to forces known to or suspected of
Sorry,
non-compliance.
Ambassador, time's up. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Nicaragua.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you, Madam President. The government of the Republic of Nicaragua bids a cordial welcome to the Honourable Delegation of the Republic of Turkey and thanks it for presenting its report to the UPR and has the following respectful recommendations. 1. To continue to support the defence of human rights through its humanitarian assistance, and 2. Pursue its zero-tolerance policy against torture and carry on with the measures to prevent, investigate, prosecute and punish all acts of torture and abuse, and 3. To insist on its efforts to guarantee inclusive education and promote the right of all girls and adolescents to this. We wish Turkey every success in its UPR. Thank you very much. Thank you. I give the floor to Niger. Thank you, Madam President. Niger bids a cordial welcome to the delegation of the Republic of Turkey and congratulates it on the drafting and presentation of its detailed report. We are pleased to note judicial and institutional reforms with a view to improving the human rights situation. Constructive spirit, we recommend that Turkey pursue its efforts to strengthen the capacities of the National Human Rights Institution in line with the Paris Principles. Lastly, we wish Turkey every success in implementing accepted recommendations. Thank you.
I'll give the floor to Nigeria.
Thank you, Madam President. Nigeria welcomes the delegation of the Republic of Turkey and commends it for the presentation of the country's national report for the third cycle UPR. We laud the government of Turkey for its continued engagement with the UPR process and its commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights, as well as its efforts in implementing the previous recommendations. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Nigeria makes the following recommendations for the constitution of Turkey. 1. Continue efforts in combating human trafficking and ensuring the protection of its victims. 2. Strengthen measures to ensure non-discrimination. Nigeria notes with encouragement Turkey's efforts in strengthening its legal and institutional frameworks for the promotion and protection of human rights. We also commend the government of Turkey for the measures adopted to combat trafficking and upholding the right of victims of human trafficking. In conclusion, we wish Turkey every success in its review process. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is North Macedonia.
President, North Macedonia welcomes the delegation of Turkey and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. We would like to emphasize the Turkish efforts and commitment in promoting inclusive national policies and cultivation of tolerant and welcoming culture for refugees. We welcome the establishment of the Human Rights and Equality Institution, and we also commend the ongoing implementation of the third National Action Plan on combating violence against women, while noting that the high rate of deaths as a result of domestic violence and the so-called honor killings remain a serious concern. We would like to make 2 recommendations to the Turkish government. 1. Consider ratification of the Council of Europe Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities and ratify Protocol 12 to the European Convention on Human Rights. And 2. Criminalize domestic violence, enabling the prosecution and punishment of perpetrators. I thank you.
Thank you, North Macedonia. I now pass the floor to Norway, please.
President, Norway welcomes Turkey's participation in the UPR and notes that the human rights situation has deteriorated since its last review, despite some positive steps taken. Norway recommends 1. Ensure freedom of expression in all its forms by refraining from censoring social and conventional media and fully enabling and respecting academic and artistic freedom. 2. Continue to strengthen and ensure women's rights by combating violence against women and fully implementing the Istanbul Convention. 3. Strengthen the independence of the judicial system and follow due judicial process according to Turkey's international obligations and standards. 4. Ensure and practice non-discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. 5. Fully respect the right to assembly and create a safe and enabling environment for human rights defenders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Oman.
السيدة الرئيسة، أرحب برئيس وفد جمهورية تركيا الصديقة والوفد المرافق له ونثمن جهود بلادي في مجال تعزيز وحماية حقوق الإنسان. يشيد وفد بلادي بالتقرير الوطني لجمهورية.
We have no interpretation. Can the interpreters please start? Maybe Ambassador, you start again. With the microphone, please.
It's not there. السيدة الرئيسة، أرحب.
Madam President, I would like to bid a cordial welcome to the head of the Turkish delegation and all the other members of it. We congratulate you on your efforts to promote and protect human rights. We commend you on your report, which shows your commitment to protecting human rights. We have the following recommendations. 1. Pursue your policy to prohibit all forms of discrimination against women by enhancing their enjoyment of rights in all walks of life. 2, take further legal, institutional and practical measures to consolidate the rights of persons with disabilities. And 3, implement the national programme to combat the worst forms of child labour. We wish Turkey every success in its review.
Speakers, Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. Pakistan warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey led by His Excellency Kemal J. And commend them for a comprehensive presentation of their national report. We appreciate efforts and strides made by Turkey in protecting and promoting human rights inside the country. Pakistan recommends the government of Turkey to 1. Enhance efforts to raise awareness for human rights in the judiciary and organize training courses on the issues that pertain to freedom of expression and the press. 2. Give due consideration to gender equality in the recruitment of judges, prosecutors and other staff. 3. Take concrete steps to ensure access to justice for people in vulnerable situations such as women, children, immigrants, migrants, elderly or persons with disabilities. 4. Consider review.
Sorry, Ambassador, time's up. Next speaker is Peru.
Thank you, Madam President. Peru extends its condolences to Turkey for the recent earthquake. We note progress made, particularly the Foundations Act, which allow assets to be registered on behalf of non-Muslim minorities, such as the Armenian, Assyrian, Chaldean, Greek and Bulgarian minorities. We have the following recommendations. 1, to avoid discrimination on ethnic grounds, ensuring that Kurds, Armenians and Roma have the same access to public services, particularly health and education. To ensure that human rights defenders, academics and journalists continue to fully enjoy their right to freedom of expression. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is the Philippines, please.
Thank you, Madam President. The Philippines warmly welcomes the delegation of Turkey and conveys our condolences to the victims in the recent earthquake. My delegation notes the adoption of a number of policies and action plans, in particular on the right to education and those relating to women's and children's rights. The Philippines recognizes Turkey's proactive approach in sheltering millions of refugees and granting them with temporary protection without any form of discrimination. In a constructive spirit, the Philippines presents the following recommendations for consideration. 1. Further strengthen measures to address and prevent domestic violence. And 2. Continue to review and assess its immigration laws and policies to ensure that the rights of migrants are safeguarded in accordance with international human rights standards. We wish Turkey a successful review. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Poland, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Poland thanks the delegation of Turkey for their comprehensive national report. Poland notes with appreciation the continued efforts by Turkey to improve the legislation on children's rights and welcomes Turkey's efforts undertaken to comply with the recommendations accepted during the second cycle of UPR. Poland recommends that Turkey ratifies the Rome Statute of the ICC, introduces comprehensive frameworks for protection of women and children from violence, including domestic one, adopts legislation prohibiting all forms of corporal punishment of children, provides conditions for freedom of religion in compliance with international standards. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Portugal.
Portugal welcomes the delegation of Turkey and thanks it for the presentation of its UPR report. We welcome the ratification of the optional protocol to the CRC on the communication procedure and take note of the judicial reform strategy of May 2019. However, Portugal is concerned with reports of continuing political pressure on judges and prosecutors and transfers of large numbers against their will. Portugal recommends that Turkey allows journalists, human rights defenders and all NGOs to freely exercise their right to freedom of expression and opinion, takes effective measures to improve gender equality, especially in decision-making, employment, education and health, ratifies the optional protocol to the ECRCR and the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. We wish Turkey a successful UPR. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Je passe la parole au Vietnam.
Madam President, Vietnam appreciates Turkey's commitment to review domestic legislation and policies in line with its human rights obligation under international treaties and conventions. We also take a good note of its effort in promoting the rights of women, particularly for putting into practice the strategy paper and action plan on women's empowerment for the 2018-2023 period. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, Vietnam recommends Turkey to 1. Effectively implement the action plan on women's empowerment. 2. Continue the efforts towards the protection and promotion of the rights of persons with disabilities, especially accessibility for children with disabilities. We wish Turkey a successful review. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, and I now pass the floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. The Republic of Korea warmly welcomes the delegation of Turkey to its third cycle of the UPR. We commend Turkey on its generosity in accommodating a large number of refugees and asylum seekers despite many difficulties in and out of the country. We also take note of its efforts to strengthen the judiciary through the constitutional amendment in 2017 and a series of reformative legislations last year. In a constructive spirit, the Republic of Korea presents the following recommendations to Turkey. 1. Continue to take necessary measures to ensure people's full enjoyment of fundamental freedom and human rights, in particular in the civil and political domains. And 2. Hold to account perpetrators of violence against women, including so-called honor crimes and domestic violence. We wish Turkey a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Moldova.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to welcome the distinguished delegation of Turkey and to thank the head of delegation for the presentation of the national report. The Republic of Moldova commends the Turkish government's extraordinary efforts to respond to the humanitarian crisis resulting from the massive influx of refugees fleeing from armed conflicts in the country, asylum seekers and undocumented migrants. We encourage Turkey to further provide the necessary humanitarian assistance and adequate protection to those in need. In order to strengthen the national efforts in promoting and protecting human rights, we would like to make the following recommendations. 1. To increase actions targeted at preventing and combating trafficking in human beings and proactive identification of victims, especially in the context of refugee and migrant crisis. And 2. To ensure freedom of expression in media, as well as equal and quality access to information.
Sorry, time's up. I have to give the floor to the Russian Federation now.
Madam President, we welcome the Turkish delegation and express our condolences following the earthquake in the country. We note the fairly stable human rights situation in Turkey, and we are pleased to see the steps taken by Ankara to strengthen the national human rights protection system. This includes new legislation, the removal of military courts, and the launch of a sweeping strategy for judicial reform 2019-2023. There has been clear progress in ensuring equal rights and opportunities for various categories of vulnerable groups, and with respect to combating discrimination against women. We recommend continuing efforts to expand women's access to education.
Rwanda.
Thank you, Madam President. Rwanda warmly welcome the delegation of Turkey to this UPR. We welcome the reform undertaken by Turkey to improve the effectiveness of judiciary and enhancing access to administration of justice. We further commend Turkey for its open door policy towards refugees and asylum seekers. We have two recommendations. 1, strengthen measures to combat discrimination and violence against women, including through the implementation of relevant laws, eliminating any loopholes in national legislation that might undermine the protection of women's rights and addressing discriminatory stereotypes that affect women. 2nd, consider reviewing discriminatory provisions against the person with disabilities and harmonize anti-discrimination legislation with Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities. We wish Turkey a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Rwanda. Je passe la parole au Sénégal.
I now give the floor to Senegal. Thank you, Madam President. My delegation bids a warm welcome to that of the Republic of Turkey and expresses its condolences at the recent earthquake. We'd like to congratulate on the quality of the report before us. We recognise Turkey's efforts to strengthen its legal arsenal in the area of human rights, notably by ratifying the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In addition, measures have been taken to protect vulnerable people without forgetting gender mainstreaming in public policies and programmes. In light of the foregoing, my delegation encourages Turkey to pursue the positive measures to build on achievements in the area of protection and promotion of human rights. We'd like to make the following recommendations. 1, to ratify the optional protocol. 2, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And 2, to ensure that the National Human Rights Institution is properly funded in line with the Paris Principles. We wish the Turkish government every success.
Serbia Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Madam President. The Republic of Serbia warmly welcomes the delegation of Turkey to the interactive dialogue of the UPR process. Serbia took note of Turkey's continued efforts to enhance compliance with the recommendations of international human rights mechanisms, both in law and practice. Strengthening the national human rights institutions in conformity with the Paris Principles is an important component of these efforts. It is also commendable the maintaining of its long-standing cooperation with UN human rights treaty bodies and the special procedures of the Human Rights Council, in particular Turkey's standing invitation to the special procedures since 2001. We encourage Turkey to keep the same pace in obeying international human rights documents through its state institutions so that no category of persons are left behind.
Time's up, sorry. Next speaker, Sierra Leone.
Madam President, Sierra Leone welcomes the Turkish delegation. My delegation welcomes Turkey's ongoing comprehensive democratic reform process. We particularly laud the strong political will to revitalize the reform process. The new judicial reform strategy and the development of a new action plan on human rights are indeed commendable. Sierra Leone also welcomes Turkish strong engagement in humanitarian efforts. We recommend as follows. 1, take effective measures to ensure that the new National Human Rights Action Plan fully embraces the recommendations accepted by Turkey in the UPR. Secondly, adopt comprehensive reforms towards redressing gender justice and inequalities. Sierra Leone wishes Turkey a successful review. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Singapore.
Singapore welcomes Turkey's efforts to improve access to education for its people, including for persons with disabilities, through projects such as the Inclusive Education Program. We commend in particular efforts to allow persons with disabilities to integrate with their non-disabled peers in a learning environment. We recommend that Turkey continues to expand the coverage of programs and projects to facilitate inclusive education for persons with disabilities, including in rural areas. We commend Turkey's efforts to combat violence against women through programs such as the Third National Action Plan on Combating Violence Against Women 2016 to 2020, and by strengthening institutional support services for victims. We recommend that Turkey continues to ensure that all relevant personnel providing support services through women's shelters and violence prevention and monitoring centers receive adequate training and capacity building to more effectively assist women in their care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Singapore. And I now give the floor to Slovenia. Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Slovenia thanks the delegation of Turkey for its presentation and would like to recommend the following. First, to ratify the UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education, and second, to consider decriminalizing defamation or insult by abolishing Articles 299, 267 and 125 of the Turkish Penal Code. Let me use this opportunity to express our appreciation of Turkey's hospitality to Syrian refugees. We also welcome Turkey's ratification of the third optional protocol to the CRC and accession to optional protocol to CRPD. But we are concerned, though, over reported deterioration of freedom of expression and independence of judiciary in recent years, as well as of discrimination, including gender-based one. Wishing Turkey all the success, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now the next speaker is the Solomon Islands.
Madam President, Solomon Islands warmly welcome the delegation of Turkey and thanks the delegation for the presentation of its national report. We commend Turkey's efforts to advance human rights domestically since the last UPR and its effort to enhance compliance with the recommendation of the International Human Rights Mechanism, both in practice and in law. Solomon Islands makes the following recommendation. 1. Withdraw the reservation regarding Article 27 of the ICCPR. Second, urge state media and state leaders at all levels to meet the obligations under the Constitution, Article 10, treat all people equally regardless of religion, and speak against derogatory statements made against Jews, Christians and other religious minority. And 3, permit entrance into the country by...
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, time's up. The next speaker is Somalia. Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Somalia extends a warm welcome to the distinguished delegations of the Republic of Turkey. We recognize the significance of the Turkish UPR report in the protection and the promotion of human rights and being fully committed with its obligations driven from both the national and international legislations. Somalia commends Turkey's humanistic policy that has opened its doors to all the refugees seeking safety and peace, regardless of race, religion, language, and ethnicity. Somalia recommends 1, to continue the effort to combat against all acts of terrorism, 2, continue to implement a new judicial reform strategy, and 3, to continue playing a leadership role in the field of humanitarian development. We wish Turkey a successful review. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ambassador. The next speaker is South Sudan.
Thank you, Madam President. The delegation of South Sudan welcomes the delegation of Turkey and thank them for the national report. We would like to recommend the following. 1, increase women's participation in all forms of decision-making. 2, encourage inclusive education for disabled children. 3, increase women's access to higher education. South Sudan wishes Turkey all the best and successful review. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and I now give the floor to Spain. Ambassador, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Spain bids a very cordial welcome to the Turkish delegation. We thank you for taking part in this exercise. And we also thank you for presenting your national report. In order to complete Turkey's commitment to the international legal framework to protect and promote human rights, Spain respectfully recommends that you 1, ratify the Rome Statute and the 3rd optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. 2, to repeal honour crimes in Article 29 of the Criminal Code and criminalise gender-based violence. And 3, raise the age of criminal responsibility and effectively enforce the ban on child marriage. Thank you. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Sri Lanka welcomes the delegation of Turkey and appreciates their presentation. We commend measures taken by Turkey since its last cycle to advance human rights, including the establishment of the Human Rights and Equality Institution and initiating national action plans on combating child labour and violence against women. In a constructive spirit, Sri Lanka recommends that Turkey, 1, continues efforts to combat trafficking in persons, including by strengthening the legal framework and ensuring the safety and welfare of victims of trafficking. 2, further strengthens the National Human Rights and Equality Institution. And 3, enhances efforts to increase female representation in higher education and employment. We wish Turkey success in its UPR engagement. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Madam. And the next speaker is the State of Palestine.
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of my delegation, I would like to welcome the distinguished delegation of Turkey and welcome the steps taken by the government to promote and protect fundamental freedoms and human rights. We appreciate the efforts and action taken by the government of Turkey to improve the status of women in political, economic and social life, including through implementing the strategy paper and action plan on women's empowerment 2018-2023. We recommend that the government of Turkey continue its effort in this regard and to ensure equal representation in decision-making positions in the public and private sector. We also commend the government's commitment in improving education. We recommend that the government of Turkey continue its effort in this regard and to adopt policies to enhance inclusion in education for girls and children with disabilities. We wish Turkey a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Sudan.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. يرحب السودان بوفد.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Turkey and thank it for the presentation of its report. We also extend our condolences for the victims of the quake. We took note of the national report of Turkey, which covered all the efforts aiming to promote human rights in the wake of the last UPR review, particularly with regards to the ratification of the optional protocol to the CRPD. And we tabled the following recommendations. First, further enforce the rights of persons with disabilities, integrate them in society and provide them with health care. Secondly, continue the provision of humanitarian aid, education and health services to refugees, migrants and asylum seekers. We wish Turkey success in this UPR review and thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Sweden.
Madam President, Sweden would like to make the following recommendations. 1. To reform the penal code, including the law on counter-terrorism, to ensure respect for freedoms of opinion and expression, online as well as offline, in full accordance with Turkey's international obligations. 2. To release all those democratically elected politicians that have been arbitrarily detained or arrested and refrain from further violations in this regard. 3. To adopt a comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation which includes sexual orientation and gender identity as protection grounds. Sweden notes with concern the negative developments with regards to the implementation of human rights obligations since the coup attempt in 2016. The legislation introduced in the aftermath of the state of emergency in 2018 has far-reaching effects on society and institutions, including compromising judicial independence and rule of
Sorry,
law.
Sweden, time's up. Le prochain orateur.
The next speaker is Switzerland. Madam President, Switzerland thanks Turkey for its report and clarifications provided in the presentation. We have the following 3 recommendations. 1. Use judicial reform to strengthen the right to the freedom of expression and press freedoms, particularly by amending counter-terrorism laws and aligning them with international human rights standards. 2. Enhance the monitoring of detention facilities and conduct impartial investigations into all torture and abuse allegations in line with your zero-tolerance policy on torture. 3. Consider repealing or at least ensure a narrow, proportional and non-arbitrary enforcement of Articles 125, 215 through 1 and 318. Thank you. Next speaker is Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Madam President. We have the following recommendations for the country under review: to cease interfering in the internal affairs of Syria and to terminate Turkish aggression in the Syrian territory with immediate effect, to comply with Security Council anti-terrorism resolutions and stop supporting terrorist groups, cease the exploitation of refugees and using them for political and financial blackmail as a human trafficking commodity, to cease the theft and smuggling of antiquities in cooperation with armed terrorist groups, to cease imposing the Turkish language and demographic changes implemented in cooperation with terrorist groups, fight the surge in prostitution in areas with high numbers of Syrian refugees, and adopt a comprehensive anti-trafficking law and prohibit solitary confinement and involuntary treatment of persons with disabilities placed in institutions.
Of Turkey to the UPR, Thailand recommends the following. First, implement relevant policies and action plans to advance gender equality and promote women's empowerment and participation in political and economic decision-making processes. Second, continue to take steps to promote and protect the rights of ethnic, religious and linguistic minorities and combat discrimination, stereotypes and prejudice against minority groups. Thailand commends Turkey's efforts to advance the rights of non-Muslim minorities, including the rights on their properties. Thailand commends Turkey's provision of humanitarian assistance to over 3.6 million Syrian refugees, including access to free public health care and education, both especially fundamental to the development of refugee children. Thailand applauds several plans and initiatives to promote and protect the rights of persons with disabilities, including through inclusive higher education and accessible transportation services. Thailand wishes Turkey every success in the UPR.
Thank you very much. Timor-Leste is the next speaker.
Madam President, we extend our welcome to the member of delegation of Turkey present here today, and we thank them for the presentation of their report. Timor-Leste is pleased to note from its national report that Turkey has drafted a judicial reform strategy and that torture became a ground dismissal from the public service in 2017. We furthermore welcome the addenda to the Code of Criminal Procedure stating that investigations against law enforcement officials regarding torture are investigated personally by the public prosecutor are prioritized. Nonetheless, Timor-Leste presents the following recommendation for the consideration of the government of Turkey. That's Turkey protect the exercise of the right to freedom of expression of journalists, human rights defenders and all non-governmental organizations. That's Turkey promptly investigate all allegations of the extrajudicial killing. Timor-Leste wishes the delegation of Turkey for successful UPR review. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Je passe la parole.
I now give the floor to Togo. Thank you very much, Madam President. My delegation wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of Turkey, whom we congratulate on the presentation of the third national report. With a view to building on Turkey's efforts to protect and promote human rights, Togo would like to make the following recommendations. Firstly, to ensure that its national human rights institution is endowed with sufficient resources in order to effectively deliver on its mandate. Thirdly, to strengthen the rights of married women and those of their children by the civil registration of all marriages. Thirdly, to adopt a general law against human trafficking and to continue efforts to prevent, suppress and punish this phenomenon and any forms of sexual exploitation of children. Togo wishes Turkey every success in the implementation of its recommendations. Thank you. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Tunisia.
يرحب وفد بلادي بالوفد التركي ويثمن.
Thank you very much. My delegation wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of Turkey. We congratulate Turkey on the measures taken to protect and promote human rights as well as the legislative and institutional reforms. We have the following recommendations which we make in a constructive spirit: to continue efforts to enhance the human rights situation in accordance with the Paris Principles, and secondly, to continue efforts to fight discrimination against women, to continue efforts to eliminate gender-based violence, and to continue efforts to enhance access to inclusive education for children with disabilities. We wish every success to the Turkish delegation in the framework of this UPR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tunisia. And the next speaker now is Turkmenistan.
Madam President, Turkmenistan welcomes the delegation of Turkey and joins others in offering our profound sympathy to the families of the victims of the recent earthquake. Welcoming the establishment of the Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey, acknowledging the project on strengthening the culture of democracy in basic education institutions, Turkmenistan recommends Turkey, 1, to carry out further activities to protect and improve human rights, including through the mandate of the established institution. Second, to consider effective implementation of the 1923 development plan and other national strategies and action plans aimed at promoting the rights of the women, children and persons with disabilities. Turkmenistan wishes Turkey a successful implementation of UPR recommendations. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the Ukraine.
President, Ukraine welcomes the delegation of Turkey and countries' adherence to the UPR process. We positively note the establishment of new mechanisms which strengthen the national human rights protection system, in particular the Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey, and the adoption of the Judicial Reform Strategy for 2018-2023. Recognizing that many challenges still exist, Ukraine recommends to, first, consider ratifying the ICPPED, secondly, reinforce efforts aimed at safeguarding rights of persons with disabilities, including guaranteeing their access to inclusive education. Third, continue taking steps to prevent violence against children and eliminate child labor. Fourth, ensure the independence and transparency of the HREIT in line with the Paris Principles. We wish the delegation of Turkey a successful review.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next speaker is the United Kingdom.
Madam President, the United Kingdom notes that the end of the state of emergency following the 2016 failed coup and progress against Daesh and the PKK provide opportunity for reform ahead of the 2023 elections. We are concerned by harassment and imprisonment of journalists. We trust the government will remove obstacles to freedom of expression. We recommend that Turkey, 1, implement the National Action Plan and Strategy document on combating child, early and forced marriages. 2, protect freedom of expression, including for journalists and human rights defenders by decriminalising defamation. 3, amend constitutional provisions on appointing members of the Council of judges and prosecutors, ensuring their peers elect the majority. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker now is Tanzania. Tanzania, are you present? No. That is not the case. We pass to the United States of America.
The United States welcomes Turkey's delegation. We recommend Turkey, 1, reform Article 7.2 of the Anti-Terrorism Act and Article 228 of the Turkish Penal Code to address only incitement to imminent terrorist attacks, and ensure that any restrictions on expressions of opinion are consistent with Article 19.3 of the ICCPR. 2, end arbitrary arrests of media professionals, civil society activists, academics, and so many others for exercising their human rights and fundamental freedoms. End discrimination against members of minority groups. 3, revise the structure and appointment process of the Council of Judges and Prosecutors to ensure appointments and promotions are based on objective criteria and insulate the CPJ from executive interference. We remain deeply concerned by the suspension of democratically elected mayors in the southeast. We call on Turkey to ensure fair trial guarantees due process and the right of individuals to elect their representatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker now is Uruguay.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We highlight the plans made to increase girls' enrollment at school and efforts made to promote education for persons with disabilities. We make the following recommendations to align the anti-terrorist legislation and Article 301 of the Criminal Code with international human rights standards, ensuring protection for academic freedom and the rights of students. Secondly, to promote investigation into all allegations of extrajudicial killing and forced disappearances, ensuring that the perpetrators are brought before the justice system. And thirdly, to ensure that freedom of expression and association is upheld. And fourthly, to adopt comprehensive legislation for the protection of human rights activists, which includes investigating allegations of presumed violations and intimidation. Thank you. Uzbekistan has the floor. Madam President, we thank the delegation of Turkey for the presentation of the national report. We welcome the reforms undertaken in this country on a broad range of human rights issues. Equally noteworthy is the cooperation between Turkey and international institutions, including the special procedures of the HRC. We have the following recommendations: to create the necessary conditions for the full functioning of the Human Rights and Equality Institution of Turkey in accordance with its charter, and to continue efforts to prevent discrimination against women and to create equal rights and opportunities for them, including through national strategic programs and action plans. We thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. The next speaker now is Jordan.
Madam President, we welcome the participation of the delegation of Turkey and we thank it for its presentation of national report, which was prepared on the basis of participatory approach, which engaged relevant public authorities and HRIs, universities. And we commend the country's efforts to comply with the recommendations provided by the international human rights institutions in practice and in law. We note that the enforcement of national human rights institutions is key in this regard. Madam President, we table the following recommendations. First, go ahead with efforts to implement the CRPD. Second, scale up institutional support services provided to victims of violence against women and ensure their access to shelters. In closing, we wish Turkey success in this UPR review, and thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker is Libya, Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam President. We welcome the distinguished delegation of Turkey and thank it for its effective participation and excellent presentation. We appreciate efforts made by the State of Turkey to implement numerous recommendations accepted in the previous report. We welcome progress made and positive developments in the field of human rights, including a number of legislative and other measures for the prevention, investigation, prosecution and punishment of torture and ill treatment. We recommend the following. 1. Further implement the judicial reform strategy. 2. Increase women's participation in all forms of decision-making. 3. Continue drawing the attention of the international community to the plight of refugees and call for international burden sharing. Finally, we would like to express our condolences to the families of the victims of the earthquake. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And the Ambassador of Libya was the last speaker on our list. I now give the floor back to the Turkish delegation, to His Excellency Mr. Faruk Kaymakci and his delegation to address all the remaining observations and comments and make any final remarks they may wish to make. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished participants, I thank you for your contributions. In response to some of your recommendations, I will now provide information on women's rights, children's rights, and the rights of persons with disabilities. Equality between men and women has been among the core principles of the Republic of Turkey ever since its foundation. let us remember that Turkish women were granted the right to vote, but not only right to vote, the right to be elected in 1934, long before many countries. In line with this legacy, Turkey constantly strives to enhance the rights of women and ensure gender equality. 2018-2023 strategy paper on action plan on women's empowerment is the most comprehensive plan on this issue. By setting out concrete objectives for all stakeholders, including public institutions, universities and the civil society, the action plan aims at enhancing women's empowerment and equality of opportunity in all policy areas, including education, economy and decision making. In response to the advanced questions by Canada, Switzerland and Germany, as well as some recommendations, violence against women is a global issue that no country can ignore. We are fully aware of that combating this problem requires comprehensive policies and decisive measures. An extensive legislative framework, including the law on the protection of family and prevention of violence against women, is already in place. Just last month, the Ministry of Justice issued a circular in order to improve the implementation of this law. This circular introduces the establishment of a domestic violence and violence against women office under the Chief Prosecutor's offices, and this circular also increases the confidentiality of personal data and provides a better protection for victims, including identity change on request. Ministry of Interior also issued a circular this month to all governorates and law enforcement units. This circular re-emphasizes diligent implementation of their mandate on combating violence against women without delay. The circular also provides training for 500,000 law enforcement personnel. Women's active participation in the economy is also among Turkey's priorities. In the last 10 years, the number of women in the workforce increased more than 50%, from around 6 million to 9 million today. This is the biggest increase among all OECD countries. Through various projects, women's economic empowerment is facilitated by offering financial incentives and career support programs. The 11th Development Plan of 2019 comprises various aims to enhance women participation in the economy, including increasing women's employment rate to 34% and women's participation rate in the labor force to almost 39%. Distinguished participants, significant steps have also been taken in the last 5 years to enhance children's rights. Turkey ratified the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the Communications Procedure in 2017. Turkey gives particular attention to the rights of the girl child and takes comprehensive measures aimed at increasing their education rate as well as ending early and forced marriages. Accordingly, trainings were given to over 18,000 public employees on gender mainstreaming and girls' education. More than 9,000 families in eastern and southeastern provinces were visited by trained teachers to encourage them to send their daughters to school. As a result, thousands of girls were enrolled in education. Furthermore, provincial action plans on combating early and forced marriages were prepared for provinces with a high rate of child marriage. Over 16,000 public employees attended awareness-raising seminars on combating early and forced marriages. National program for combating child labor is being implemented since 2017. It focuses on priority groups such as children working on the streets, children employed in heavy and dangerous works, and children employed in migratory and temporary agricultural works. The Ombudsman institution also has a mandate to protect and promote children's rights. All children who claim that their rights are being violated can apply to the institution free of charge. The institution has a separate website for children to enable them to submit their applications easily. As to the rights of persons with disabilities, Turkey ratified the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2015. We have continued to encourage inclusive education for persons with disabilities. The Ministry of National Education issued a regulation on special education services. Accordingly, persons in need of special education study both in the same classes with other children or in special education classes equipped with necessary materials. Also, we have been implementing a project since 2015 to distribute Braille devices for visually impaired students. Over 10,000 students benefit from these devices each year. Turkey considers the participation of persons with disabilities in democratic process as vital. Since 2018, mobile ballot boxes are brought directly to the persons who are unable to leave their houses due to their disability. Almost 23,000 persons benefited from this service so far. 78% of all voters with disabilities were able to cast their votes in the last general elections. We categorically reject the baseless allegation raised by the Syrian regime delegate. These futile efforts aim to divert international community's attention from the regime's continued appalling and brutal crimes, human rights violations, and its refusal to engage constructively in the political process. We are fully committed to the territorial integrity, sovereignty and unity of Syria, and all our actions are in adherence to these principles. Turkey, like any other member of the UN, is entitled to exercise its inherent right of self-defense emanating from the UN Charter and relevant UN Security Council resolutions in response to the threats to its national security. Before I make my closing remarks, I would like to give the floor to our representative from the Ministry of Family, Labour and Social Services to share further information on the measures taken by Turkey to combat violence against women. Please.
Madam President, distinguished participants, combating violence against women is a priority on our agenda. We have adopted a proactive approach in our efforts to prevent, protect, prosecute and combat violence against women in line with 2030 development goals. Turkey signed the Istanbul Convention in 2011 and was the first country to ratify it without any reservation. Also, the law on the protection of family and prevention of violence against women, drafted on the basis of the convention, entered into force in 2012. The third National Action Plan 2016 and 2020 on combating violence against women is currently in force. Additionally, provincial action plans are prepared in all 81 provinces. Also, national and provincial monitoring mechanisms have been established in order to ensure effective coordination and evaluation. Madam President, distinguished participants, we recognize the importance of specialized units in responding to and supporting victims of violence. Accordingly, specialized courts and prosecution offices have been established. Specialized units in law enforcement offices were formed at provincial and district levels. Violence prevention and monitoring centers provide counseling, guidance and assistance for victims in all 81 provinces. In addition, the number of women shelters, which was 43 in 2011, has increased to 145 and total capacity has reached nearly 3,500 beds. Furthermore, 183 social support line operates on a 7/24 basis as a preventive mechanism providing support to victims. The support line, which is free of charge, is also available in Arabic and Kurdish. For effective protecting victims, electronic bracelet system has been established in 15 provinces. Additionally, Women's Support System mobile application is also operational to ensure rapid response to cases of violence against women. Various training and awareness-raising activities are carried out for public employees. Since 2007, over 1.5 million civil servants, judges, prosecutors, police officers, gendarmerie personnel, health personnel, religious officials, and military personnel have attended to trainings on violence, human rights, and combating violence against women. Madam President, distinguished participants, in 2019, we established a working group under the coordination of the Ministry of Family, Labour and Social Services with the participation of Ministry of Justice, Interior, National Education, Health, as well as the Presidents of Religious Affairs. The working group was tasked with evaluating the current situation and analyzing the measures to be taken in combating violence against women. As a result, the coordination plan on combating violence against women was prepared and signed by these institutions for the years 2020-2021. In line with the plan, we will continue to strengthen our policies on implementation of legislation, increasing the institutional capacity, awareness raising, interinstitutional coordination, and policy making in the upcoming years decisively. Thank you.
Madam President, esteemed members of the Troika and distinguished participants, I would like to thank sincerely everyone who contributed in a constructive spirit to our review. Today's discussions and recommendations will allow us to make a well-rounded analysis and enable us to draw a more accurate roadmap for the future. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our Troika, Secretariat of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and of course, the interpreters. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, to yourself and your delegation for the presentation and your participation in this review. For the further procedure, I would like to recall that the report of the review will be prepared by the members of the Troika, who are in this case the representatives of Bahrain, Slovakia and Somalia. In accordance with the procedure implemented since 2015, the recommendation section will be distributed in the afternoon of Thursday, the 30th of January, for adoption on the same day as from 4:30 in the afternoon. The full report, including the summary section, will be circulated by email on Friday, the 7th of February 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of this meeting. We will reconvene this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. for the review of Kiribati, followed by the adoption of the recommendation section of the draft reports on Kenya, Armenia and Guinea-Bissau. The speaking time for the review of Kiribati will be 2 minutes for all. All participants are invited to be in the room on time. Thank you very much, and with this meeting is hereby closed. Okay. Yeah.
But it's easier to be arrested.